one of the key debates at the core of Season 6 episode, Across the Sea, is about the character of Mother. And whether or not she was a smoke monster. In the audio commentary for the episode, showrunners Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse discuss the following. Damon says, "It is worth mentioning the idea that Mother is the smoke monster at this point in the game." Carlton responds, "That is interesting." Damon continues, "She has laid waste to the entire village. And what an interesting theory that is, because one of the questions that keeps arising is, if Jacob's smoke monster was his brother, then who was the smoke monster before him? Or was the smoke monster actually created in this episode? Does good always need evil? And that is an excellent question to be asking. However, as always, this channel does not like to rely upon external sources, or supplementary materials, for the answers. I prefer to use the TV show itself to find explanations for everything, in universe. The creators of Lost have given many interviews stating that they want the show to speak for itself. They don't want us to rely upon old podcasts or non-canon materials, which sometimes featured contrary or conflicting information. The only thing I want you to take away from that commentary excerpt is the idea that the showrunners want us to be having this conversation. Specifically on the nature of good and evil, and the genesis of the smoke monster. If we can unlock the truth behind Mother and the smoke monster, then perhaps we can unlock the truth behind the meaning of the series as a whole. And the artistic intent behind the origin story of Jacob and the Man in Black. So, going forward in this chapter, we shall stick to evidence shown within the episode that supports the theory that Mother was a smoke monster. The first indication comes in the form of her sudden appearances. First, to Claudia by the stream. Then again to the Man in Black in the wheel chamber. Notice how she managed to come down that ladder without making a sound, and in the short time it takes to do this single one shot. If you look closely, she has appeared several feet behind the ladder as well, as if she has teleported there. This is incredibly subtle detail, intended to leave room for ambiguity. In order to ignite debate. But really look closely at Mother's positioning in this scene. Consider the physics of where she is stood from the ladder and zero indication of her having used it. Could it simply be a mistake in the geography of how the scene was blocked, or is it intentional? By design, this is only the beginning of these clues to Mother's true identity. She knocks out a much younger, stronger man with her bare hands by sheer force. Of course, this is totally plausible for a human woman to do to a human man, and not proof of smoke detection. However, what comes next is more definitive. Mother somehow manages to single-handedly destroy the wheel chamber and bury it under the earth. Could a middle-aged woman do this on her own? It is possible, but not very plausible. What comes next is even more suspicious. The Man in Black discovers that she has decimated his entire village. Not only has she burnt the whole place to the ground, but she slaughtered every living person in it. Men, women, and children. This is surely not the work of a single human being. This whole scene is extremely reminiscent of the aftermath following the smoke monster's attack on the others at the temple in an earlier episode called Sundown. Look at the Man in Black wandering through the burning embers of his former home. Now look as we survey the carnage at the temple. These scenes are mirrors of one another. And another clue as to what was responsible for the village destruction in Across the Sea. The final piece of evidence comes in the form of Mother's warning to Jacob. She tells him that going down into the cave of light would be a fate worse than death. The conversation goes like this.
Just promise me. No matter what you do, you won't ever go down there.
Would I die?
You'd be worse than dying, Jacob. Much worse.
So, what could be worse than dying? Maybe being deprived of your mortal body and humanity. A person who enters the heart of the island on the living plane will have their consciousness uncoupled from their body. And that consciousness, aka that person's soul, will be exiled from the source for all time. Put simply, to enter the light in the cave is to be banished. To have no chance of finding rebirth within the source, like every other human soul. Mortal human beings don't understand that death is, to some extent, a gift. And to live forever is a curse. It means your soul can never be at rest. You can never let go. You can never move on.
You aren't the only one who's lost something, my friend. The devil betrayed me. He took my body. My humanity.
So, how would Mother know this? How would she know that going into the cave and the aperture of the source would be a fate worse than death? Because Mother did it herself. A long, long time ago. She became the first smoke monster. Her consciousness was exiled from her body. And this is how the original lineage of protectors were created. Being a smoke monster and a protector was one and the same thing for her. The best way to view Mother is as someone who demonstrates both the qualities of light and darkness. She shows love and compassion to her sons. It is clear that she cares for them as a mother would. But she is also deeply manipulative and shows violent aggression towards Claudia and her people, and most likely to anyone who comes to the island uninvited. Mother is neither all good, nor all bad. Being a smoke monster doesn't make you inherently good or evil, it all depends on how corruptible the nature of the person is. The consciousness of the person ultimately informs the nature of the black smoke. Also, notice how the clothes she is wearing consist of both light and dark colors. Light above, but darkness beneath. She passes on these light and dark qualities to her sons. Her dim worldview on humanity ends up becoming the Man in Black's worldview. While her faith in the light and the importance of the island takes deep root in Jacob's burgeoning philosophy. Each man is informed by different aspects of their mother. As are we all. Across the Sea is almost like a parable about the sins of the parents. A key theme that echoes throughout the entire series. But I want to hit the pause button here for one moment. Because there is another school of thought on this subject that needs to be addressed before we go any further. Some fans absolutely believe that there was a smoke monster before the Man in Black. But they actually go one step further and claim that the smoke monster always existed. That it was an elemental force that existed within the light. The theory suggests that the light is the embodiment of the good in people and the black smoke is the embodiment of all the bad. Which means rather than Mother being the smoke monster, she simply summoned it to destroy the village. And when the Man in Black's body went into the light, the smoke monster escaped from the cave, having somehow merged with the Man in Black's essence. So, the Man in Black, as Jacob knew him, was legitimately dead and gone. And the smoke monster started to believe it was the Man in Black as a result of this merging. There are so many problems with this theory I almost don't know where to begin, but I am willing to take a major detour in this chapter to debunk this claim once and for all. The smoke monster as its own entity implies the existence of an original evil, or an original darkness. But the show goes out of its way to debunk notions of good and evil time and time again. There is no such thing as pure good or pure evil, only symbols and ciphers, and belief systems. Light and dark, us and them, faith or science. But, as this video series has demonstrated, the narrative of Lost is far more complex than these binary concepts suggest. Science explains faith. One of us can become one of them. And light and dark can exist within us all. Jacob, by his own admission, is not without flaws or his own darkness. While the Man in Black is shown to be a rather tragic villain with a fairly sympathetic backstory. Does that sound like Lost wants us to believe in notions such as ultimate good and ultimate evil? So, the smoke monster always existing and being this embodiment of natural darkness is a contradiction of the core message behind the series. And what does this theory mean by the series finale? If Fate Lock is the embodiment of absolute evil incarnate, then what happens now that this original evil has been killed? Is there no more evil in the world? The theory makes little sense once taken to its logical conclusions. Another excerpt from the Across the Sea commentary helps to clarify what the writers were thinking here. Damon says, what is evil? Is the Man in Black really evil? Or is he a victim? I mean, clearly, all the guy wants to do is leave the island. He hasn't hurt anybody. He hasn't done anything malicious. Carlton Hughes adds, it was a very purposeful decision not to center our show on two perfect deities. And by perfect, we mean perfect manifestations of good and evil. And that's the case in most mythology shows. You get to the point where you have that person who's the personification of good and that person who's the personification of evil. We sort of feel like in Lost that this dynamic exists in each character, including our authority figures. And that was what we were trying to convey in this episode. Notions of good and evil in Lost have been constantly challenged right from the beginning. The show went out of its way to show us that seemingly bad people like Sawyer could be redeemed, whereas seemingly good people like Michael could be corrupted. Dogen speaks of the scale that exists within all people. There is the light and there is the darkness, and everyone's scale can shift towards either side throughout their lives. It is symbolic, not literal. Jacob and the Man in Black were never supposed to be the literal embodiments of good and evil. We see Jacob make bad, impulsive decisions, and be quite mercenary in his willingness to sacrifice lives to the greater good. Whereas we see the man in black show remorse and grief. He is portrayed in a sympathetic light in Across the Sea. Even after centuries of being corrupted and driven by his own rage, he still manages to find a degree of empathy towards someone like Claire. He expresses emotions about his mother to Kate that feel sincere. The only reason he has become as malevolent as he has is because he has absorbed so many memories and experiences of island inhabitants. And he sees only the bad in them. It was like he fed poison to his own consciousness for thousands of years. To make the smoke monster into a separate entity completely negates the complexity of this character, and the themes of the show. But let's stop trying to debunk this theory in thematic terms. Let's address it by using actual dialogue and references from the show. Jacob refers to the smoke monster in human terms. He uses the pronouns he and him. He never says it. If he understood that the monster was merely masquerading as his dead brother, then he would make that distinction. Listen carefully to how he explains the monster to our losties in Season 6 episode, What They Died For.
I brought all of you here because I made a mistake. A mistake I made a very long time ago, and now, because of that, there's a very good chance that every single one of you and everyone you've ever cared about is going to die.
What mistake?
You call him the monster. But I'm responsible for what happened to him. I made him that way. And ever since then, he's been trying to kill me. It was only a matter of time before he figured out how, and when he did, someone would have to replace me. And that's why I brought you all here.
Jacob confirms to the group that the monster was his mistake. He made the man in black, quote-unquote, that way. And Jacob is not the only person to refer to the smoke monster in human terms.
Why is Claire here? And what was she talking about?
She's a confused girl, under the influence of an angry man.
What man?
For years, he has been trapped. But now Jacob is gone. He's free.
Even the man in black talks about himself in human terms.
I'm not a what, Ben. I'm a who. You're the monster. Let's not resort to name-calling. What I am is trapped. And I've been trapped for so long that I don't even remember what it feels like to be free. Maybe you can understand that. But before I was trapped, I was a man, James, just like you.
I have a hard time believing that.
Well, you can believe whatever you want, but that's the truth. I know what it's like to feel joy, to feel pain, anger, fear, to experience betrayal. I know what it's like to lose someone you love.
Later, in What They Died For, Ben asks Fakelock why he bothers to walk anywhere if he can turn into smoke and whiz around the island. And Fakelock responds that he likes the feel of his feet on the ground. It reminds him that he used to be human. There are further implications and references to the fact that Smokey used to be human, but it's time to circle back to Mother. Now, if you concur that the actions of Mother in Across the Sea indicate the presence of a smoke monster, but you also agree that the black smoke is not some pre-existing supernatural force living in the cave, then you can deduce that Mother absolutely was the smoke monster before the man in black. We can assume that Mother hailed from one of the early civilizations on the island. And we can further assume that she was the first protector of the light. The island allowed her to find its heart, as it needed a catalyst to begin a very long and involved series of events that would sustain its own existence, and the existence of all things. Mother was drawn to the cave, perhaps out of curiosity. Something that went beyond her understanding. And without anyone to warn her about the dangers of entering the light, she went down into the cave and followed the warmest, brightest light that she had ever seen or felt. Much like a moth to a flame. Back then, pre-cork, the light would have been glowing out through a crack in the earth and she would have waded her way through the shallow stream of water directly to the edge of this hole in the world. As she entered the open aperture of the source, she was instantly consumed. Her consciousness was uncoupled from her body and expelled from the cave. Her body, now an empty vessel, was no doubt transported to the same location we see the Man in Black and Jack being moved to. Further downstream, this translocation of bodies is very similar to what happened with Locke, Desmond and Mr. Echo following the implosion of the hatch. Their bodies were teleported out of the energy pocket. Mother's original body would have eventually decomposed and returned to the Earth. Or perhaps she was buried by her people. This, however, does raise an interesting point. Because it means that Mother leaves behind a body twice on the island. Once when she was mortal, long before we ever meet her, and then once again many centuries later. But we know that this also happens to the Man in Black. His original body is found outside of the cave, downstream, by his brother Jacob. Yet, centuries later, we also see that fake Locke leaves behind a body too, after he is depowered and killed. Had the Man in Black been appearing in his original form throughout the last season of Lost, then we would have seen him leave behind his body for a second time on the island. Furthermore, we cannot be totally sure that, the way Mother presents herself to people in Across the Sea, is indeed what she originally looked like. She could very well be appearing as someone else who died on the island. Perhaps Mother looked more like this when she went into the cave. Regardless, smoke monsters, when killed in any corporeal form, will leave behind a body. It would have taken Mother a long time to come to terms with what she had become. On the one hand, she had been given the gift of eternal life. On the other hand, she had been cursed to live forever without humanity or mortality. We can only assume how this impacted her people and how they viewed her. Perhaps this is where her withering view of humanity actually came from. Her own people. Having been deprived of form in this way would also have awakened a connection to the source within her. She would have gained an understanding of its importance and allowed herself to be guided by it. Remember, the source is the prime mover, not the protector. It knows the past, present and future, because time does not exist within it. Therefore, it must guide Mother to her ultimate destiny. She would have developed this deep communion with the island as a result of her transformation and, over time, gained relevant knowledge. Most importantly of all, she would develop an inherent understanding that if the light goes out here, it will go out everywhere. The earth, time, and existence itself must be protected from the ills of mankind. Unlike Jacob, she did not want people to come to the island. She was not the force bringing others to its shores. Hence why she tells Claudia that everyone comes to this place by accident. It is not her will. It is the island's will. So, the Mother Smoke Monster genuinely became an ancient security system for the island. Her mission became to protect the source from those that were seeking to plunder the light. And she could do that protecting physically by using her powers to crush anyone she deemed unworthy. During her tenure, she would have witnessed much conflict and violence as different tribes waged war over who got to occupy this island territory. History repeated itself so much that Mother became tired of dealing with people and grew weary of protecting the light. Her only hope of escaping her role was to die. But she could not die without someone to replace her. She didn't trust people enough to simply hand over the reins to anyone, as she saw mankind as inherently corrupt. She needed someone pure, someone special, someone she could influence. When a pregnant Claudia arrived, Mother had finally found her candidate. A baby she could raise as her own that she could keep pure and teach from a young age the ways of the island. Only rather than one child, she got two. Buy one, get one free. So, she raised Jacob as a son. And she raised the boy in black as a replacement. It is implied that she favors the boy in black because he demonstrated special abilities from an early age. A natural communion with the island. Which made Mother believe that the island wanted him.
I love you in different ways. My time is over.
Why? Why is your
It
time
has
over?
to be you, Jacob.
No, it doesn't. You wanted it to be him. But now I'm all you have.
It was always supposed to be you, Jacob. I see that now. And one day you'll see it too, but until then, you don't really have a choice.
Mother's hope was that she could pass on the power of protectorship without the smoke monster curse. She believed that the boy in black was predestined to protect the light. But, she got it wrong. Very wrong. Because the island needed both a protector and a smoke monster. For many more centuries to come. In fact, it was vital that both roles exist. So, the Source split Mother's role in half between the two boys. Jacob became the protector, and the man in black became the smoke monster. A very literal metaphor for children taking on the different aspects of their parents. It's why Jacob and the man in black were made to be twins. A symbolic representation of two halves of the same person. Protector, smoke monster. But there is some bleed over between these deinterlaced parts of Mother's power. We see that the source still speaks to the man in black, even in his post-smoke monster form, guiding him on his path to causality and the future. It's why he knows where and when to go to give the compass back to a time-traveling John Locke.
Okay. This must be quite the out-of-body experience.
Something like that.
Your timing was impeccable, John. How did you know when to be here?
The island told me.
This is the same instinctive understanding and intuition that Jacob has about what needs to happen next. That inner voice speaking to them, igniting thoughts and driving emotions. But I know this explanation still raises questions for people. So, let's address them head on. The first question is this. If Mother was a smoke monster, how could she possibly pass on her power to someone else when we know that the man in black cannot do the same thing? To answer this, we have to note the distinct factors that make the Mother smoke monster different from the man in black smoke monster. The most obvious difference is that Mother was both smoke monster, and she was a protector. This gives her powers that the man in black does not have because a protector has a controlling influence over the source's properties, and vice versa. She was always able to pass on her protector power to the right party. The man in black was never ordained in this way. Still, this leads us to another valid question. If she is the smoke monster, how can she be killed without the need to turn off the island and depower her? This is where the previous chapter might help in finally untangling the mythology here. A smoke monster protector was never supposed to be invincible or unkillable. What do we know which was the one thing that didn't exist back when Mother was around? A key difference between her time and the man in black's time. There was no cork installed at the source when Mother was killed. During her reign, the aperture of light in the cave was fully open and the light flowed out freely, without obstruction. After the man in black became smoky, the Egyptians came and caused the ancient incident. This caused Jacob to oversee the plugging of the leak. But by damming the flow of the light from the power source, it rendered the man in black indestructible. On a meta level, this was because the island needed the smoke monster in play for a very, very long time in order to fulfill the time loop of 2004. On a more practical level, it's simply mechanics. Remember the vending machine from the Flash Sideways? The Apollo bar is the man in black. Trapped. He cannot escape, but he also cannot be taken out. The cork must be unplugged from the machine in order to release the trapped candy bar, so it can finally be taken out and disposed of. We know the cork was designed to keep the power on, but it was now also keeping a very faulty mechanism running as well. Turning it off then back on again, reset the faulty mechanism. The man in black was an aberration of sorts. An error in the machine, so to speak. Yes, he was Jacob's mistake, but he was also the island's necessary evil. A means to an end. Part of a giant feedback loop across time itself. But let's discuss how Mother specifically functioned, because her existence was pre-cork. The light powered her like an eternal battery, not too dissimilar from the man in black. But, unlike him, she was a complete battery, with both a negative and a positive charge. The positive is the light. The negative is the dark. And she could pass on the positive charge to Jacob without imbuing him with the negative. In order to die, which is what Mother ultimately wanted after untold centuries of service, she had to pass on this positive charge to someone. To keep the circuit live. Only then would the source allow her to die. You have to switch out an old component for a new one. Always. And once Jacob's inner light was activated, Mother was relieved of her responsibilities and rendered completely mortal once again. Therefore, she could die in the exact same way we see Jacob killed later on. Another way of looking at the source, and indeed the island as a whole, is that it is alive in some way. We have already explored this notion, but let's go through it one more time. The electromagnetic energy pockets are like vital organs. While the flow of water across the island forms a circulatory system, much like the bloodstream. The cork is placed in the literal heart of the island. as if to prevent the main artery from bleeding out. During Mother's reign, the light was flowing freely through the cave and without any obstruction, or blockage. And Mother was its torch-bearer. Her term could come to an end as long as there was someone to pass the torch on to. And then, the source would allow her to die. It's almost like an unspoken bargain between her and the light. She makes Jacob into the torch-bearer and he can access the light within himself and others, forging a path towards the future and helping to create this circle of time. We could look at the time loop he helps to perpetuate, sort of like a much-needed heart bypass for the island. A way of stopping vital organ failure from killing its host. It is perhaps a cosmic joke that it took a surgeon to perform this very specific operation, with assistance from a fertility doctor to give back life to the island. All of this is to say, the man in black is not a protector and has no controlling influence over the source, therefore no way of passing on his power, or his curse, or even being able to die. He is trapped, just like that Apollo candy bar in the vending machine. To sum things up, Mother was both protector and smoke monster. She split this role between two brothers. Right down the middle, and it was the will of the source for it to happen this way. It of course remains possible that Mother was simply a protector first, then became the monster sometime later by going down into the cave. But this channel takes the view that the lineage of island guardians and the powers of the protectorship itself originated with the creation of the very first smoke monster. Lost's very own version of Mother Earth. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to see more videos. Until the next time, stay lost.